The invitation landed on Lily Palmer's kitchen counter at 7:14 on a Wednesday morning, and she stared at it the way you stare at something you already know is going to cost you something. Not money, not time, something older than both. She recognized the handwriting before she even turned it over. That particular slant. Slightly forward, slightly arrogant. The penmanship of a man who had always written his name on things that didn't belong to him and never lost a night's sleep over it. She had watched those same hands sign contracts she had written word for word. Watched them accept credit in rooms full of people she had charmed, pitched, and closed. Watched them hold a glass at industry dinners while the people across the table praised work that lived in her head long before it lived anywhere else. She set down her coffee mug, picked up the envelope with both hands, felt the weight of it, heavy cream paper, the kind designed to announce its own expense before you've even broken the seal. The kind of weight that certain people have always believed communicates importance. She had learned, over years of handling documents that actually changed things, that the paper something is printed on has nothing to do with its value. She opened it. Gold-embossed edges, thick cardstock. Marcus Hale and Vivian Ashford request the honor of your presence at their wedding. She read it twice, set it on the counter, looked at it, let it sit there in the morning light while her coffee went on getting cold, while the city outside her window continued its ordinary business of noise and motion, while the apartment around her held its particular quiet. Then she found the note card paper-clipped to the back. Lily, thought you'd want to see how things turned out. No hard feelings. M. No hard feelings. She stood in her apartment, 600 square feet, in a city that had once felt like possibility, now sometimes felt like a holding pattern, and felt something cold and quiet move through her chest. Not grief, not anger. Something older and more patient than both. The specific feeling of a person who has been underestimated for so long that the underestimation has started to feel like its own kind of insult. Not for what it did to her, but for what it said about the person doing it. Something her grandmother had recognized in her decades ago, sitting on a porch in rural Tennessee on an August evening that smelled of cut grass and heat lightning. Watching a 12-year-old Lily lose a school election she had worked harder for than anyone in that school. Her grandmother hadn't offered comfort. She hadn't reached for her hand or offered platitudes about deserving better. She had offered observation instead, in the specific dry tone of a woman who had seen everything and understood that most pain was information rather than punishment. "Baby," she'd said, "some people will take from you and smile while they do it. You don't cry. You don't shout. You study the situation. You think clearly. And then you move." Lily studied the situation. Marcus had not sent this invitation out of courtesy. The courtesy version of this scenario was not sending anything at all. You don't invite your ex-wife to your second wedding through the mail unless you want her there in a specific way. He had sent it because he wanted her present, dressed up, composed, seated among the 300 people who knew exactly what had happened between them. Watching him stand at an altar with a woman from a family that could buy and sell the company Lily had built with her own hands. He wanted her to see what he had become. He wanted her to understand what he had traded her for. He expected her to decline. And he also expected, somewhere in that particular arrogance of his, the arrogance that comes from having the right face and the right ease and the right name on the right documents, for long enough that you start to believe those things are the same as having built something, that she couldn't stay away, that she would come because it would hurt to come, and he wanted her to hurt. And she was the kind of woman who walked toward the thing that hurt her rather than away from it, because she had always mistaken endurance for progress. He had spent 7 years watching her absorb every difficult thing and keep going. He had mistaken her endurance for smallness, her patience for acceptance, her staying for an inability to imagine anything else. He was about to learn the difference between a woman who stays because she can't leave and a woman who stays because she hasn't finished yet. Lily walked to her closet, reached up to the very top shelf, behind a stack of winter sweaters she hadn't worn in 2 years because the apartment building ran warm and because sweaters had been part of a different season of her life that she was in no hurry to revisit. Her fingers found a small, flat envelope. She pulled it down and held it in her hands for a moment, not hesitating, just present with the weight of it, the specific weight of something you have kept because you knew the moment for it hadn't arrived yet. She sat on the edge of her bed and opened it. Inside, a single card, heavy stock, almost no information. Just a name. KJ Shin, and a phone number. No title, no company, no context. She picked up her phone, dialed, and the story that had really been building for 8 months. Long before the invitation, long before the wedding, long before Marcus Hale had any idea what was already in motion, finally came to its beginning. Before you can understand what happened at that wedding, you need to understand what Lily Palmer built, and more importantly, what it cost her. She walked into Marcus Hale's consulting firm 7 years ago on a Tuesday in November, when the place had the quiet, specific desperation of a business that hadn't decided yet whether it was going to survive. One real client. A name that meant nothing outside the building's own lobby. A founder who was charming, photogenic, excellent at first impressions, and completely out of his depth in the technical work that made a business actually function in the long term. Lily had grown up in Clarksville, Tennessee, the granddaughter of a woman who had worked 3 jobs simultaneously and raised 4 children on the philosophy that excellence was not optional. Not as pride, not as ambition, but as protection. A shield you build with your own hands because the world does not build it for you, and has not historically been in a hurry to apologize for not building it. Her mother had taken that philosophy and amplified it in her own way. A structural engineer who had been the only woman in her department for 11 years, who had outlasted everyone who doubted her through sheer relentless competence. Her father had contributed a different thing, the belief that precision was a form of respect for the work, for the people receiving it, for yourself. Lily had grown up understanding something that not everyone learns, and some never do. That in rooms where people don't expect you to be the most capable person present, you have to be so undeniably, visibly, thoroughly capable that the room has no choice but to reckon with it. Not loudly, not at the expense of anyone's comfort, but completely. By the time she walked into Marcus Hale's failing consulting firm, she had an MBA, 3 years of market strategy experience at a firm that had noticed her talent while still managing to underpay it, and a specific, almost uncanny ability to read a business's structural weakness and rebuild it from the inside out. She could walk into a failing pitch and identify within 15 minutes the exact moment it was losing the room. She could look at a client relationship and trace the precise conversation that had started the erosion. She could hold the full architecture of a deal in her head while managing every human element of the room simultaneously. Marcus was the face. Everyone knew it, including Marcus, which was one of the things she had initially respected about him, that he didn't try to be something he wasn't in their early conversations. He understood that what he had was charm and presence, and the gift of making any room he walked into feel like it was exactly where it should be. That mattered. In consulting, it mattered enormously. Charm opens the door. Competence is what keeps it open. And the competence was Lily. She wrote every proposal. She identified every significant client opportunity. She built the methodology they used, the reporting frameworks that their clients' operations came to depend on, the language that became the firm's recognizable brand in the market. She negotiated every major contract, not always from the front of the room. She was often the person sitting slightly to the side, the one clients called afterward when they had actual questions about implementation, the one who always had the answer and gave it without making the caller feel foolish for asking, the one who remembered every detail from every meeting and sent the follow-up emails that converted interest into commitment. She worked through exhaustion so deep it had become structural, part of the architecture of her days, in the way that foundations become part of the architecture of a building, invisible, unremarkable, assumed to be there without anyone asking what it took to put it there. She worked the week her grandmother passed, flew home for the funeral on a Friday, sat in the front pew and held her mother's hand through the full weight of it, flew back Sunday night, and was at her desk at 7 on Monday because a proposal was due. She cried in the bathroom once, sitting on the tile floor with her back against the door for exactly 11 minutes. She had timed it without intending to because she was, even then, tracking everything. Then she washed her face, fixed her makeup with the practiced efficiency of a person who has learned to do this without a mirror, went back to her desk, and finished the draft. She worked the way her family had raised her to work, completely. With the understanding that halfway was not a version of trying, that when you are building something real, you do not get to decide when it is inconvenient to keep going. And she was also, separately, building a life with Marcus. They had dated for a year before she joined the firm. She had told herself at the time that the timing was coincidental, which it wasn't quite. But she believed it long enough to stop examining it. They moved in together in the second year of working together, married in the fourth. She had told herself that what they had at home was different from what they had at the office, that the imbalance she sometimes felt, the credit that drifted to his name rather than hers, was just the nature of his being the founder and would correct itself over time as relationships and organizations matured. She told herself that for 3 more years. When the firm crossed into 8-figure annual revenue, when it became, by any external measure, a genuine success story, the kind that got mentioned in industry profiles and at conferences as an example of intelligent growth, Marcus came home one evening. I sat across from her at the dinner table they had bought together from a shop in the garment district on a Saturday afternoon, when the city had been golden and the future had felt wide open, and told her he needed someone different beside him. He used the word polished. He said it with his eyes slightly to the left of her face, a specific avoidance she had learned to read over years of watching him navigate conversations he'd already decided, but hadn't quite committed to owning. He had met Vivian Ashford 3 months earlier at an industry dinner, the daughter of Gerald Ashford, founder of Ashford Capital. Old money, the kind that had been old for long enough that it didn't need to mention itself. A woman who had attended the right schools, sat on the right boards, and existed in certain rooms, not because she had earned her way into them through the accumulation of skill and work and sacrifice, but because her family had always been in those rooms, and the rooms had learned to arrange themselves accordingly. The divorce took 5 months. Her lawyer told her she could fight, pointed to years of documented contribution, to contracts she had authored, to client relationships she had built from nothing. Lily said she was tired. She was not lying. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from being the most capable person in a room for years and still watching the credit land somewhere else. From doing the work, building the thing, and then discovering that the work alone was never going to be enough, that what she had understood as a foundation was, in the eyes of the room, invisible infrastructure. It's the kind you only notice when it's gone. She took her clothes, her car, and her silence. She did not take the house. She did not fight for the savings. Everything was in his name. That was the thing about 7 years of building something that lived officially in someone else's name. The official version was the only version the law recognized, but she kept copies of everything she had ever built. Every proposal in both drafts, the original in her voice and cadence, and the version Marcus had cleaned up and signed his name to. Every client email from the 7 years, organized by date and relationship and outcome. Every contract she had authored. Every strategy document. Every competitive analysis. Every framework and methodology manual and onboarding package and pitch deck. All of it backed up to a drive that sat in the top drawer of her bedside table in the 600-square-foot apartment, like a quiet, patient archive of a life that officially belonged to someone else. She didn't know exactly why she kept them, only that they were hers, and that she could not leave them behind. She found smaller work, lived small, told herself it was temporary, told herself that again for 2 years, built herself back up slowly, the way you build something when you are starting from less than nothing, contract by contract, client by client, reference by reference, rebuilding the professional reputation that had been, for years, invisible under someone else's name. Learning to let herself be visible. Learning to put her own name on things and not wait to see if the room would accept it. It was harder than it should have been. Not because she lacked ability. She had never lacked ability. And she understood that clearly now in a way she had not always been permitted to understand it when her work was being delivered under someone else's signature. The difficulty was something more specific than that. When you have spent years making yourself unobtrusive in order to survive a particular environment, your own invisibility becomes a habit, a reflex. You walk into rooms already slightly smaller than your actual size. You pitch yourself at a volume calibrated to not discomfort the person across the table, rather than at the volume that accurately represents what you bring. You hold back, not because you have nothing to offer, but because you have learned, at a level below conscious thought, that offering too much invites a specific kind of response. She caught herself doing it. In meetings with potential clients, in the particular way she would start to make a point and then soften the edges of it. On phone calls, in the way she would hedge language that didn't need hedging. She began to notice it, to track the exact moment she performed smallness rather than inhabited it. And then she began, methodically, to stop. It was not a dramatic reversal. It did not happen in a single moment of revelation. It happened the way real changes happen, slowly, then all at once. A phone call where she answered a question directly rather than through 3 layers of qualification. A proposal where she charged what her work was worth rather than what she guessed the client would feel comfortable paying. A meeting where she sat at the head of the table and did not move to a chair along the side when someone more senior walked in. Small things. But small things, accumulated, are how a person reclaims the floor they have been standing on all along. The 600-square-foot apartment stopped feeling like a punishment and started feeling like a vantage point. The medical invoices were gone. The professional reputation was rebuilding, month by month. The copies in the bedside drawer sat there quietly, not needed yet, but present, the way a foundation is present in a building. And then, one Wednesday morning, the envelope arrived. If this story is already doing something to you, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. There is something you need to understand about KJ Shin, about how Lily got his card, because how they met changes everything about what came after. Not just what happened at the wedding, but what it meant. 8 months before the invitation arrived, Lily was in Portland on a business trip, a client meeting that had run 4 hours with the particular productive exhaustion of meetings that actually accomplish something. the kind where everyone leaves with more than they came in with, where you can feel the relationship deepening in real time, where you drive back to the hotel thinking about next steps rather than about what went wrong. A budget hotel, the kind you book when you're building a business, and every dollar you don't spend on rooms is a dollar you can spend on the work. She had ordered room service, eaten alone at the small desk by the window, as reviewed her notes for the next morning, and was brushing her teeth and thinking about nothing of particular consequence when there was a knock at the door. Hotel staff. Young, professional, slightly apologetic about the hour. He handed her a sealed envelope. No return address. Her name in handwriting she didn't recognize. A careful, deliberate script that suggested someone who paid attention to detail. She thanked him. Closed the door. Stood in the middle of her hotel room and opened it. Inside were documents. Financial documents, routing records, shell company structures, ownership chains across 5 countries. Dense, technical, the kind of paperwork that is designed to be difficult to read by intention rather than accident. She read the first page slowly, noting the structure, the way the names were layered under holding companies, under trusts, under entities registered in jurisdictions chosen specifically for their lack of transparency requirements. She turned to the second page and stopped. She understood 2 things simultaneously and with complete clarity. First, she was holding something that people had been seriously hurt over. The structure in these documents was not complex by accident. It was designed to be invisible. The specific financial architecture of people who cannot afford to be seen, assembled by someone who understood that opacity is its own kind of power and had invested significantly in constructing it. Second, she had a choice. And the choice she made in the next 60 seconds was going to matter in ways she could not yet calculate. She thought about her grandmother, about the specific wisdom of a woman who had survived things that didn't have polite names and had always said that the most important kind of intelligence is knowing which battles are yours and which ones will simply consume you without producing anything worth the cost. These documents were not her battle. She had found them by accident and could walk away clean. No one knew she had them except whoever had left them. And whoever had left them had likely left them for someone else, in a different room, and would not be back to ask questions about this particular guest. She photographed every page anyway. Thorough, methodical, the way she did everything. The habit of a person who has learned that information kept carefully is always more valuable than information discarded casually. Then resealed the envelope. She went downstairs to the night manager with the composed efficiency of someone doing something routine, placed the sealed envelope on the front desk, explained there had been a delivery error, and went back to her room. She did not sleep well that night. She lay in the budget hotel bed and thought about what she had read and what it meant, and whether she had made the right decision. She could think of 3 other courses of action she might have taken, and she examined each one in the thorough, dispassionate way she examined everything, and she arrived at the same conclusion each time. Yes, this was right. Not because it was profitable, not because it was strategic, but because it was correct. And she had learned, at cost, in the years behind her, that correctness was the only metric that stayed stable. But she slept. At 6 in the morning, there was another knock. The man in the hallway was perhaps 34, Korean, dressed in a dark suit, fitted with the kind of precision that comes from tailoring rather than purchasing, the difference between a garment and a garment that belongs to a specific person. He was very still, not relaxed still, disciplined still. The stillness of someone who had grown up in a world where careless movement had consequences and had internalized the lesson so thoroughly that economy of motion was now simply how he existed. His eyes moved to both ends of the corridor, before settling on her face. A sweep so brief and so practiced, she almost didn't catch it. At the base of his throat, above his open collar, was the edge of a tattoo. Dark, geometric lines, precise and deliberate, disappearing beneath his shirt. She didn't know enough then to read what it meant. She would understand later. "You returned the documents?" he said. "Yes." "You opened them first?" Not a question. "Yes." "Why give them back?" Lily looked at him evenly. "Because whatever those documents belong to has nothing to do with me. And I'd like to keep it that way." He studied her with the specific, unhurried attention of someone running a complete assessment, filing information, weighting it, drawing conclusions, without appearing to move. "May I come in?" She should have said no. She stepped back and let him in. His name was KJ Shin. He spoke with the careful precision of a man who selects words the way lawyers do. Technically accurate, deliberately incomplete. He used phrases like family interests and legacy business. Beneath those phrases, in the careful space of what he didn't say, lived things that didn't have polite names. KJ Shin was not a man with complicated investments. The Shin family had built their power over 3 generations through means not discussed in comfortable settings. Relationships enforced rather than chosen, a reputation that preceded them and stayed after them, a name that in specific circles made grown men choose their words with a particular kind of care. KJ had spent 5 years trying to move the family into legitimate business. Slow, difficult, methodical work. There were people who wanted that transition to fail and were willing to make that opposition felt in concrete terms. The documents Lily had found had been stolen by one of those people. Someone building leverage, trying to make the legitimacy project impossible by exposing what came before it. She had returned them without using them, without asking what they were worth, without conducting even a brief negotiation over the information she had photographed and clearly retained. "You could have leveraged what was in those documents," he said. "I know. Most people would have, even accidentally. I'm not most people." Something in his expression shifted, barely visible, but she caught it. The micro-adjustment of a man who has assessed thousands of people and is encountering something that doesn't fit his existing categories. "No," he said quietly. "You're not." He reached into his jacket and placed a card on the table between them. Just his name. Just a number. Nothing else. "I owe you a debt. Call if you ever need anything. Without limitation." He left. Lily stood in the center of her hotel room for a long moment, looking at the card. Then she tucked it into her bag, went to her meeting, came home, filed the entire experience under things I do not yet fully understand and will not discuss, and moved on with her life. She did not know, could not have known, that KJ Shin had researched her thoroughly within 24 hours of walking out of that room. Not from suspicion, from discipline. In his world, you do not let a stranger walk away from sensitive documents without understanding exactly who that stranger is, what they are capable of, and what they are likely to do with what they know. He found everything. Her background, her parents' story, the consulting firm she had spent 7 years building from a failing operation into an 8-figure annual revenue business. Marcus Hale's name on every external document she had ever authored. The divorce settlement she had accepted when she was too tired to fight any longer. He read all of it. He read the proposals she had written and the versions Marcus had signed. He read the client relationships she had built and the accounts that had been retained in his name. He read the way a company had been constructed out of one person's capability and another person's access, and how the story told about that company in the market erased the first person entirely and amplified the second. He understood what had been done, not just as a business assessment, which was his instinct, but as something else. The specific thing that happens when someone confuses access with ownership for long enough that everyone around them starts to believe it too. He began to move. A holding company registered in a jurisdiction chosen for patience rather than secrecy. An acquisition mechanism built over months through a series of legitimate transactions, each one unremarkable individually, collectively forming a structure that was elegant in the way that things are elegant when every piece serves an exact purpose. He cultivated relationships with Marcus's clients, carefully at a distance, through intermediaries who had no visible connection to anything else. He identified the joint venture clause in a 7-year-old agreement, the one that allowed third-party acquisition under specific performance conditions. He verified, through 4 separate legal reviews, that everything would hold. The financial architecture required only one thing to activate: her call. He was waiting for her to decide she was ready, which might happen or might not. And he had made his peace with both possibilities. He had prepared for the one and accepted the other. This was, she would come to understand, simply how he operated. Completely, without reservation, leaving nothing to chance that didn't need to be left to chance. 8 months later, she called. She had read the invitation twice, read the note card 3 times, stood in her kitchen until the coffee went cold. And then, with the particular clarity of someone who has been patient for a very long time and finally feels the patience end, she went to her closet, retrieved the card, and dialed. He answered on the second ring. "Miss Palmer's." His voice was level, unsurprised, like a man who had been holding a place for this call. "You said if I ever needed anything." "I did. I need something." A pause. "There is something you should know before we discuss anything further. I have been moving pieces into position since the morning after we met in Portland." Lily went still. "When I read your file," he continued, "I understood what had been done to you. I built the mechanism to correct it. I was waiting for you to decide you were ready." She sat down on the edge of her bed, slowly, the way you sit when your understanding of a situation has just fundamentally reorganized. "You didn't know I'd call." "No. But I prepared as though you would." A silence between them. The silence of 2 people who understand that what is about to happen is significant and requires no performance around it. "Do you want to walk into that wedding looking like someone he underestimated?" KJ said. "Or do you want to walk out of it having taken back what was yours?" Lily thought about her grandmother, about the porch in Tennessee, about 11 minutes on a bathroom floor, and then washing her face and going back to work, about 7 years of building something that lived, officially, in someone else's name. "Both," she said. "Then I need the wedding date. And the copies I believe you kept." "I have everything. Every draft, every client email, every contract." "Of course you do." A pause. And she could have sworn she heard something almost like warmth in his voice. Not sentimental warmth, but the warmth of recognition. "Don't buy a dress. Someone will contact you tomorrow." He ended the call. She sat in her small apartment, phone in her hands, looking out the window at a city moving through its ordinary evening, completely unaware that in this room, a woman who had been building quietly for 2 years had just decided it was time to stop being quiet. For the first time since she had signed those divorce papers in a conference room, with her hands steady and her face controlled, she felt something that was not exhaustion. Before I keep going, if you're new here, please subscribe. Every week I bring you a story that makes you feel something true. That is the only promise I have ever made on this channel. And I have never broken it. The stylist arrived at 8 on the morning of the wedding, 2 assistants, rolling cases that clinked softly as they moved through Lily's apartment. The stylist herself was a woman who looked at Lily not with the accommodating, agreeable attention of someone trying to please her, but with the focused, evaluating look of someone solving a problem. The way a sculptor looks at a block of material, not asking what it wants to become, but identifying what it already is. She did not ask what Lily preferred. She simply looked, and then she began. The dress arrived at 10, hand-delivered in a sealed black box. No branding, no label. Lily opened it alone. Deep crimson. Not the soft, apologetic red of Valentine's cards or spring flowers. The deep, settled red of something old, of lacquer, of garnets, of things that have decided exactly what they are and require no external confirmation of it. The cut was architectural, a fitted bodice, clean lines, structured shoulders, nothing decorative, nothing ornamental. A dress designed by someone who understood that the most powerful statement a garment can make is to ask for nothing and assume everything. Lily stood in front of her bathroom mirror. The woman looking back was not the woman who had signed divorce papers in a conference room. Not the woman who had carried boxes into this apartment and told herself it was temporary. Not the woman who had spent 2 years making herself smaller, adjusting her presence to fit a life that fit like something borrowed rather than made for her. This woman looked like she had been on her way somewhere the entire time and was only now arriving. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Car at 4. Small box on the counter. KJS. She hadn't noticed the box. Small, dark, no larger than a deck of cards. She opened it. Earrings. Diamond, set in brushed white gold. The kind of simplicity that costs more than ornate things ever do, because simplicity is the craft. Because stripping everything away and leaving only what matters requires more skill, more understanding, more restraint than adding more. She put them in, picked up her bag, locked her door, walked downstairs, one black car at the curb, not a display of resources. One car, because KJ Shin was not a man who needed to announce himself. His presence had never required infrastructure. He stepped out when she reached the pavement. Black 3-piece suit, no tie, collar open at the throat, and in the afternoon light, the tattoo was fully visible. Dark, geometric lines running down the left side of his neck, precise and deliberate, unmistakable to anyone who knew how to read what they were looking at. Which family? Which lineage? Which tier of something that most people inside that wedding would be quietly grateful they had no direct relationship with? He looked at her. Didn't speak for a moment. Just looked at her with the full attention of a man who does not distribute his attention carelessly, the complete, unhurried regard of someone for whom seeing something clearly is a discipline rather than a habit. Marcus Hale has no idea what he gave up. Not flattery, not a compliment designed to smooth the moment into something easier. The flat, dry correction of a factual error, the kind of thing you say when someone has miscounted and you are noting the correct number. Something warm and quiet moved through Lily's chest. "Let's go," she said. They got in the car. The Caldwell Grand occupied an entire city block on the waterfront. Old stone, old money, the kind of building that appeared in architecture magazines and in society column photographs, and never in the same week. Broad stone steps leading up to a facade designed to make the people climbing those steps feel like they were arriving somewhere that mattered. The kind of building that Marcus had booked a year in advance, almost certainly imagining this day, imagining Lily walking through those doors and understanding what he had become. The chandelier venue, The 300 guests. The father-in-law seated in the front row, whose name alone opened rooms that Marcus had been trying to access for years. The complete performance of a man who had arrived somewhere and needed the room to confirm it. The car stopped at 4:47, 13 minutes before the ceremony. KJ stepped out first, straightened his jacket with two small, unhurried movements, extended his hand. Lily took it and stepped onto the pavement, the crimson dress catching the afternoon light like something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. No fanfare, no theatre. Just Lily Palmer moving up those stone steps beside a man who moved through the world as though the space had already agreed to arrange itself around him. Inside, the quiet hit first. Conversations did not fade. They stopped, mid-sentence, mid-laugh. The specific stop of sound that happens when a room registers something it cannot immediately categorize. People turned, stared, looked away, looked back. The helpless attention of a crowd that has recognized something it cannot name but cannot stop looking at. The event coordinator found Lily's name on the guest list with efficient professionalism. Then KJ placed a card quietly beside the guest book as they passed. The coordinator looked at the card, looked at it again. Her entire professional composure underwent a visible recalibration. Not simple adjustment, but the specific, careful stillness of a person who has just understood what room they are in and what that means for every decision they make for the rest of the evening. Of course, Mr. Shin. Her voice was a different register than it had been for any of the previous 300 guests. Please, allow me to find you a better position. Fourth row, center. Perfect sightlines to the altar. The seating of people who are not asked where they would like to sit, because the room already understands where they belong. Around them, guests made calculations. Lily could feel it. The eyes moving from her dress to KJ to her face and back again, the conversations restarting at a slightly different frequency. Former colleagues she had personally brought into the firm, clients she had closed, serviced, saved, people who had called her directly when things went wrong, even when Marcus's name was on the letterhead, because they had learned early that she was the one who actually fixed things. Friends of Marcus who had stopped returning her calls after the divorce, with the quiet efficiency of people choosing the more useful side of a story. Who had smiled at her in the hallway of the firm's Christmas parties for years, accepted her help with their own presentations, borrowed her expertise with the casual ease of people who treat competence as a shared resource and credit as a private one. They were all looking at her now. Not with the careful, polite pity she had grown accustomed to over 2 years of smaller rooms and quieter days. The pity that was its own kind of condescension, that said, "We see what happened to you," and are sorry about it, while simultaneously confirming the story it had created about her. Something different. Something she had not seen directed at herself in a long time. Recalculation. The specific look of people who are revising an assessment they thought was complete. Who are running back through what they understood and finding that several things they were certain of require a second look. She recognized it, had seen it directed at other people many times over the years, had understood its anatomy. She had never expected to be on the receiving end of it in this building, at this event, wearing a dress she had not bought. Lily sat down, back straight, not from vanity, but from the understanding her mother had always carried, that how you hold your body tells the room what to think before you've said a word. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Marcus walked in from the side entrance at exactly 5 o'clock, and the sight of him was almost unremarkable in its familiarity. He looked exactly the same. The particular way certain men remain exactly the same, because nothing has ever given them a serious reason to change. Still handsome in the uncomplicated, photogenic way. still carrying himself with the relaxed ease of a man who had always found the world arranged conveniently around him. He worked the room the way he always had, smiling at guests, making brief eye contact with the people who mattered, performing the comfortable authority of a man at home in his own success. Then his eyes swept across the front rows. Found Lily. She watched him almost manage not to react. She had spent 7 years learning the micro-expressions that preceded his larger ones, the involuntary flicker before the composed response arrived. She saw it now, genuine surprise, sharp and unguarded. Then rapid internal calculation, then something moving toward unease that he was assembling his composure over the way you assemble a coat, over something you don't want people to see. His eyes shifted to KJ, stayed there half a second too long. Something in his jaw tightened. Then the processional music changed, and the room turned. Vivian Ashford came down the aisle in a dress that had clearly cost more than most people's cars. Her father Gerald beside her, with the satisfied expression of a man finalizing a deal he had researched thoroughly. She was beautiful in the composed, curated way of someone who had always known she was being looked at and had learned to perform for it gracefully. She was not the villain of this story. She was a woman who believed everything she had been told, who would spend the next several months understanding precisely what that cost. Lily watched the ceremony with her back straight and her face arranged into polite attention. The readings, familiar words about love and commitment and permanence, words that meant things when the people saying them had made the decision for reasons that would survive contact with reality. The vows, Marcus's voice confident and measured, the practiced delivery of a man who understood that conviction was a matter of register rather than content, the exchange of rings. She watched his hand as the ring was placed, the same hand she had watched sign her work for 7 years, and she felt nothing except clarity. The specific, clean clarity of someone who has already processed the grief and arrived at the other side of it. She noted the way Vivian's father watched Marcus during the vows, not the warm attention of a father watching his daughter's happiness arrive, the evaluating attention of a businessman assessing a transaction, present, contained, taking stock. Gerald Ashford had done his due diligence on Marcus Hale. She was certain of that. What he didn't know was that his due diligence had been conducted on a set of assets that would not exist in their current form by the time the reception started. Beside her, KJ glanced at his phone once, briefly, put it away. She did not ask. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." 300 people broke into warm, celebratory noise. As Marcus and Vivian walked back down the aisle, Marcus looked directly at Lily. She had known he would. She had been waiting for exactly this moment since the car, i.e. had been holding the patience of it, the particular patience of someone who knows that the moment they are building toward is coming and does not need to hurry it. And there it was. The whole reason for the invitation. The entire architecture of this small, deliberate cruelty laid completely visible in a single moment of eye contact. I won. You came, you watched, and I won. Lily looked back at him and smiled, just slightly, not the warm smile she used in boardrooms to make difficult clients feel understood. Something quieter and more specific. The smile of someone holding information that the other person doesn't have access to yet. She watched it land, watched the certainty in his eyes shift, just a fraction, just enough, into something that was not quite certainty anymore. One brief flicker. And then the crowd absorbed him, and the noise took him, and it was done. Good, she thought. Sit with that feeling for a while. If you're feeling something right now, drop a like on this video. It tells me you're here, and it helps more people find this story. Keep watching. The best part is coming. The Caldwell Grand's ballroom was everything Marcus would have chosen, and that was, itself, a kind of information. Crystal chandeliers throwing fractured light across white flowers and polished silver. Tables set for a dinner that would be remembered. A live jazz quartet in the corner playing the specific, expensive smoothness of music designed to communicate permanence. Champagne circulated. Guests found their seats. The speeches began. Gerald Ashford went first. A man who had spent decades in rooms full of power and had learned to inhabit them without effort. The kind of ease that money 3 generations old eventually produces in the people who carry it. He spoke about legacy, about 2 families, about Marcus Hale's promising future, and what they would build together. He was perhaps 4 sentences from the end when his phone vibrated on the table in front of him. He looked at it. 1 glance. Less than 2 seconds. His face did not change in any way that most people in the room would have noticed. But Lily noticed. She always noticed. The very controlled, very precise shift behind his eyes. The expression of a man who has just received information that has rewritten the situation he believed he was standing in. Not panic, something colder, more deliberate, more permanent. Gerald Ashford excused himself from the podium with exactly the right amount of grace and exactly slightly too much urgency for a man with nothing pressing on a night like this. He walked out of the ballroom. At the head table, Vivienne frowned and leaned toward Marcus. He shrugged, smiled at the room, reflexive, habitual, and filled the moment the way he had always filled moments, with surface. KJ checked his phone, said quietly, without looking at Lily. "It's starting." She said nothing. She watched. The best man finished his speech. Laughter, applause, the first dance. Marcus and Vivienne moved well together, practiced, coordinated, the performance of 2 people who had rehearsed their public image. The song ended. The floor opened. The band played on. That was when the venue manager appeared, and not the coordinator from the entrance. Someone more senior, moving across the ballroom with the controlled, measured urgency of someone managing a situation they very much did not want 300 guests to notice they were managing. She reached the events lead. Brief, low exchange. The events lead's face went from professional warmth to pale in approximately 3 seconds. She turned and moved quickly toward the back corridor. At table 12, a man Lily had originally introduced to the firm, brought in through 18 months of careful relationship cultivation, looked at his phone. His expression moved from relaxed to careful in a single breath. He murmured something to his wife. They stood, unhurried and deliberate, and moved toward the exit. Table 8. The same. Table 4. Table 14. One by one. In the specific way people leave a building when they are not certain the structure will hold. Not running, not panicking, just choosing with quiet certainty to be somewhere else. The dancing continued. The music continued. But something was draining away from the edges of the room, steadily, quietly, like a tide going out in real time while the surface stayed undisturbed. Marcus was still on the floor, laughing, accepting congratulations, fully at ease in the way of a man who has not yet received the information that would change everything. Then his phone rang. He checked the screen. His smile dimmed, just slightly, the first visible crack in what had been, until this moment, a flawless performance. He stepped off the floor to the edge of the room, one finger pressed to his ear against the noise. Lily was 15 feet away and could not hear the words, but she could read his body with the precision of 7 years of close study. Controlled, then not. He hung up, dialed. His face changed again. Something in the jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way his weight shifted, dialed again and again. Vivian crossed the floor to him. He didn't answer her. His eyes were moving, calculating, running through something internal that she couldn't see. Gerald Ashford reappeared at the ballroom entrance. He moved with the purpose of a man who has just had a conversation that dismantled everything he understood about the situation. Stone-faced, direct. He crossed the room to his daughter, took her arm, and leaned close. "We are leaving." "Dad, what?" "The reception." "There is no more reception." He looked at Marcus. The look of old, a serious money that has been lied to, which is not the look of outrage, because outrage implies surprise. This look was quieter and more deliberate and more permanent than outrage. "You told me you owned the firm outright, controlling interest, 7 million in assets, 22 major client contracts in your name." "I do," Marcus said, and his voice had lost its easy register. As of 4:47 this afternoon, every asset you presented to me is gone." The band stopped playing. No signal from anyone in the room. They simply felt what the room had become, and they stopped. "The contracts are no longer registered to you. The accounts you used to fund this evening are frozen. The firm you told me you ran now belongs to someone else." 300 people. Absolute silence. The particular silence of a crowd that is present for something real and knows it, that will describe this moment for years. "You lied to me,"
to me! You
Gerald
lied
said.
to my daughter!
Quiet, measured. "You lied to my daughter. And you used my family's name to extend credit you had no right to." He took Vivian's arm. She looked at Marcus. The initial confusion, then the longer, specific moment of a woman understanding that what she believed was real had always been constructed. She looked at the ballroom, the 300 guests watching her, the untouched wedding cake in the corner, the flowers that had cost more than most apartments. She let her father lead her toward the door. One of Gerald's staff stepped between Marcus and the retreating family, politely, immovably. The door closed. Into that silence, the venue manager stepped forward. "Mr. Hale, the payment for this evening has been reversed. The outstanding balance is $63,000. That payment cleared weeks ago. The reversal was initiated by the legal account holder." "I am the legal account holder." "Not as of this afternoon. Ownership of the firm was transferred at 4:47. All associated account access was closed at 5:15. She held out a document. He took it. His hands were not steady. He read the first paragraph. The color left his face, completely, all at once, the way certainty leaves when it has been entirely removed rather than merely shaken. KJ stood. He crossed the ballroom at the specific, unhurried pace of a man for whom urgency is a choice rather than a reflex. He went first to the venue manager. A brief, quiet exchange. He placed a card in her hand. She looked at it. The same visible recalibration, the professional shift of a person who has understood what name they are looking at and adjusted every calculation accordingly. She nodded, stepped back. Then KJ turned and walked toward Marcus. Every conversation in the ballroom that had tentatively restarted stopped again. 300 people. The second silence, different from the first. More focused, more complete. Marcus looked at him, took in the suit, the stillness, the tattoo at the collar. He did not have specific knowledge of the Shin family. But some things communicate below the level of knowledge, in the register where the body understands before the mind has language for it. He knew he was looking at something he had never encountered before, something his easy charm had no category for. "Who are you?" Someone you should have researched before you sent my guest an invitation. His voice entirely level. The particular quiet of a man who has never needed volume to make himself heard in any room. You wanted Lily Palmer's to sit in this room and watch you win. So I allowed it. The ceremony, the vows, the first dance. I let you stand in front of everyone you know and feel it. Then I took it away. Not before you had it. After. He produced a single folded document, extended it. Hale Consulting was acquired through a holding company over the past 8 months. Every contract you signed in that period was with my organization. As of 4:47 today, ownership has been formally transferred to Lily Palmer's, the woman who built it. Marcus looked at the document, found Lily across the room. She was sitting exactly as she had sat through the ceremony, back straight, hands folded. The crimson dress settled around her like something decided, looking at him with the expression of someone who has been patient for a very long time and has arrived at the moment not in a hurry, not in anger, but with the particular clarity of someone who has simply, finally, arrived where they were always going. One more thing, KJ said. The mechanism that made this acquisition possible was a clause in a joint venture agreement from the second year of the firm. A clause allowing third-party acquisition under specific performance conditions. Lily wrote that clause. She built the structure that made all of this possible. She simply didn't have the resources to activate it herself at the time. A pause, precise and deliberate. She wrote the lock. I provided the key. He let that sit for one full beat. The mortgage on the house has been called. 60 days. Your employment with the firm is terminated as of today. All access to company assets has been revoked. This isn't legal, Marcus said. The hollow performance of a man saying something because there is nothing else left. Everything was legal, reviewed by 4 separate firms. You signed every document, Mr. Hale. One step closer. Still quiet. You simply didn't read them carefully enough. You confused access with ownership. A beat. It tends to be expensive. KJ turned, walked back across the ballroom. Every eye in the room followed him, then tracked back to the 4th row where Lily Palmer rose from her seat. The crimson dress moved with her. She took KJ's arm. They walked out together. The walk across that ballroom was perhaps 30 seconds. She had walked across rooms like this, won hundreds of times over 7 years. The same chandeliers, the same polished floors, the same particular quality of attention that expensive rooms generate. That feeling of being watched by people who understand the specific vocabulary of space and presentation and what it means to belong somewhere. She had walked across rooms like this one as the invisible person, the person whose name was not on the letterhead, the person clients called afterward, but not before. She walked across this room differently, not with performance, not with the conscious awareness of an audience, simply with the full occupancy of her own presence, the specific quality of someone who has put down what they were carrying and discovered that without it, so they are considerably taller than they thought. Behind them, Marcus Hale stood in the center of his own wedding reception, in the venue he had booked a year in advance, specifically to make a point about what he had become, surrounded by the 300 people in front of whom he had felt, 1 hour ago, like the protagonist of his own story, holding a document that explained in clean legal language exactly how completely and deliberately the evening had ended. By 7 o'clock, the ballroom was empty, the cake untouched, the tables still set for a party that had concluded before anyone formally said so. Marcus Hale stood alone in the center of it, holding a piece of paper. They drove in silence for several minutes, the city moving past the windows. People living ordinary evenings, walking dogs, carrying groceries, sitting in lit windows, entirely unaware that 3 blocks behind them, a man's certainty had been precisely and deliberately dismantled in the middle of his own wedding reception. "You waited until after the vows," Lily said. "Yes." "You could have stopped the whole thing before it started?" "Yes." "Why didn't you?" KJ looked out at the city for a moment. When he answered, it was with the careful consideration of someone who has actually thought about this rather than someone defending a decision. Prevention is clean. People recover from it. They tell themselves the outcome was never inevitable. A pause. But taking something away from a man after he has stood in front of everyone he knows and felt like he won, that stays. That doesn't go away. Lily was quiet, thinking about Marcus's face at the exact moment understanding had arrived in his eyes, the specific quality of that ballroom silence. "That was cruel," she said. "Yes, more than I expected." He turned to look at her. "Does it bother you?" she answered honestly. "No." Something shifted in his expression. Small. Genuine. "There is something I want you to understand," he said. "My family, what we are, what we came from. I will not dress it in polite language. You returned documents without asking what they were worth, and someone who does that deserves the plain version." He told her. The 3 generations. The means not discussed in comfortable settings. The 5 years of trying to move toward legitimate business. The people who opposed that transition with force. She looked at the tattoo at his collar. "Is it dangerous? Being close to you?" "Sometimes. I won't pretend otherwise." He was looking at her directly. "What I can tell you is that anyone who comes near you comes through me first. And I do not lose." She looked at him for a long moment, at the stillness of him, at the 8 months of quiet, methodical work he had done before she ever asked him to, not because she had earned it in the transactional sense, but because he had read her story and understood something about justice that didn't require her to be in the room for him to act on it. "Okay," she said. Dinner at a small restaurant with no sign outside and 11 tables, all occupied by people accustomed to finding places that didn't advertise. The food was extraordinary. Not performatively so, not the kind of extraordinary that announces itself in the presentation, but the deep, patient kind that only comes from people who have been making the same thing for a very long time and have learned to stop trying to improve it. The conversation moved slowly at first, with the careful quality of 2 people who are both accustomed to assessing before speaking. Then faster. Then, gradually, in the particular effortless register that happens when 2 people discover they inhabit the world with similar assumptions, similar ways of reading rooms, similar tolerances for difficulty, similar understandings of what patience actually means in practice, and had simply not known about each other until now. She told him about her parents, her mother's engineering career, her father's classroom, the specific philosophy that had shaped how she understood work and effort and what excellence was actually for. He listened the way she had noticed he listened to things that interested him, completely, without the restless quality of someone waiting for their turn. He told her things in return, about what it had been like to come into the family business at 22, not because he wanted it, but because there was no version of his life that would have let him choose differently, and the years he had spent deciding what to do with what he had been given rather than whether to accept it. At some point, Lily realized she was laughing, not monitoring it, not managing its volume or timing, just laughing freely, with the part of herself she had learned to keep stored away for when things were more settled, when she could afford to be unguarded. She noticed she'd stopped noticing. KJ watched her notice. "What?" "I was thinking I haven't done this in a long time." "Dinner?" dinner without thinking about everything else at the same time. He looked at her with the full attention he gave everything. You're allowed to stop. I know. You don't behave like you know. She thought about it honestly. I built something once and lost it because I wasn't watching the people around me closely enough. I was so focused on the work that I missed what was happening right next to it. So you stopped trusting people. I stopped trusting people carelessly. He turned his glass slowly on the table, considering his answer without rushing toward it. The habit of a man who understood that patience and silence were not the same as having nothing to say. There is a version of that, he said finally, that keeps you safe, and a version that keeps you alone. She looked at him. Which version am I doing? I think, he said, you're deciding. Outside, the city moved, quiet and entirely indifferent to the two of them sitting in a restaurant with no sign, two people from different worlds who both understood from inheritance and from experience what it meant to build something that others tried to take, what it meant to hold on anyway, what it meant to be patient for a very long time and then move decisively when the moment arrived. They sat there longer than either of them had intended. The restaurant filled and emptied around them, and neither of them moved to leave, and neither of them remarked on the time. When they finally stepped outside, the city was quieter. That particular quality of a Friday night, late enough that the first wave of people had gone home, and the second wave had settled into wherever they were spending the rest of it. She stood on the pavement for a moment, looking at the city, thinking about nothing more complex than the fact that she felt clear. The specific, functional clarity of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally, tonight, for the first time in perhaps 2 years, set it down completely. KJ stood beside her. He did not speak. He understood. She was beginning to understand that he often understood, when silence was the right thing. She looked at him. Thank you, she said. He turned to look at her, not deflecting, not minimizing. You did this. I provided a mechanism. Everything that activated it was yours. She thought about that for a moment. Thought about 7 years of proposals and client calls and late nights and early mornings and contracts that bore someone else's name. About a drive in a bedside drawer. About a decision made in a Portland hotel room to do the right thing when the right thing was also the less convenient thing. Maybe, she said, but I couldn't have done it alone. He looked at her for one long, level moment. No, he said, but you did the part that mattered first. Comment below. I want to know which moment hit you hardest. Was it the ballroom? The dress? The phone call? Tell me. I read every single one, sure months later. The sign on the 15th floor read, Palmer's Consulting Group. Her name. Her floor. Her firm. Built twice. The first time for someone else, with someone else's name on the wall and someone else's signature on the work she authored. Credit drifting to him like smoke to a vent. The second time for herself, with the resources she had spent 7 years building toward and 2 years being patient enough to wait for. The second time with her name on the door from day one, and no version of herself that considered putting anyone else's name there. The corner office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the waterfront. On clear mornings, you could see all the way to the horizon, that thin, steady line where the water and the sky agreed on a boundary. She stood at that glass sometimes and felt nothing nostalgic, only clear. The clarity of someone who has arrived exactly where they were always supposed to be, not as a destination that felt surprising, but as the obvious next step. Korean investment partners through KJ's legitimate business network opened doors to Seoul, Tokyo, Singapore. 3 new sectors. The kind of market reach she had spent years identifying and positioning toward, but had never had the capital to pursue alone. A board of 12 she had chosen herself, based entirely on capability and alignment, and nothing else. Her assistant knocked on the open door. Tokyo on line 3. Tell them I'll be 1 minute. Her phone buzzed. KJ Tokyo meeting. How'd it go? She typed back. They signed all 3 markets. We move next quarter. A pause. Then, I know. My mother is asking about grandchildren again. Lily laughed, alone in her corner office, genuinely, without monitoring it. She had met KJ's mother twice, once in Seoul, once here. The woman had the specific, assessing attention of someone who evaluates everything she encounters with the rigor of someone who has survived a great deal by being more perceptive than the people around her. She had looked at Lily the way a structural engineer looks at a bridge, identifying every load-bearing point, every potential fracture, every place where the design might hold, and every place where it might not. On the second meeting, she had said, in Korean, which she had apparently been reliably informed Lily was learning, "You are stronger than you appear." Not a compliment. The flat correction of a first impression. Lily had replied in Korean that she had been practicing for 4 months, with the specific grammar she had checked 3 times. I have had to be. KJ's mother had looked at her for a long moment, then quietly, Good. My son's world asks difficult things of the people in it. He needs someone who doesn't need to be protected from it. He doesn't need to protect me, Lily said. The older woman had nodded once, returned to her tea, said nothing further. But it was enough. Lily understood what it meant. She had heard through industry channels what had happened to Marcus. He had challenged the acquisition through 2 law firms and found nothing actionable. The legal architecture had been too thorough, too patient, too precisely assembled by people who understood this kind of work far better than he did. He had looked for comparable positions in the field and found that his name now carried a different kind of weight than it used to, the kind that preceded him into rooms and made the rooms quietly smaller than they had been. She did not think about him. She had discovered that once the weight of something has genuinely been put down, you don't need to keep reaching for it to confirm it's gone. It's simply gone, and the space it occupied can be used for other things. Vivian Ashford had quietly remarried 6 months later, someone thoroughly vetted, whose name on financial documents meant what it appeared to mean. Lily had seen the announcement in passing and felt nothing except a mild, impersonal hope that the woman was happier this time. Her assistant knocked again. Boards ready? Lily straightened her jacket. The good one. Bought after the first profitable quarter, in the specific knowledge that she had earned the right to spend that kind of money on something she wore to her own boardroom, with her own name on the wall, with her own face at the head of the table. She had stood in the shop for longer than she would admit, holding the jacket, doing the particular internal calculation of someone who has spent a long time spending as little as possible, and is learning, slowly, that what you put on your body before you walk into a room is its own kind of communication. She had bought it, without second-guessing it, without telling herself it was too much. She walked in. 12 executives rose when she entered, not from performed deference, not from a convention observed without thought, but from the specific, earned respect of people who have watched someone build something real and understand what they are in the presence of. She had chosen each of them herself. Every single person at that table had been evaluated on capability and alignment, and the particular quality she had come to understand, over years of watching her own work disappear into someone else's narrative, was the rarest thing in any room: the willingness to give credit accurately. She sat at the head of the table. Let's begin. she said. And they did. The most dangerous thing about Lily Palmer, the thing that Marcus Hale had spent 7 years looking directly at without ever actually seeing, was not her capability. It was her patience. The particular patience of a woman who had been raised to understand that the correct response to injustice is not noise. It is clarity and time and precision, and the absolute refusal to put down what is yours simply because someone with more access has decided to carry it for a while. You do not have to be loud to be dangerous. You do not have to announce yourself to be seen. The most powerful thing Lily Palmer did in this entire story was not walking into that wedding. It was not the red dress, or the acquisition at 4:47, or the ballroom silence, or the look on Marcus's face when understanding finally arrived. All of those things were real, and all of them mattered, but they were the result, not the source. The most powerful thing she did was keep everything, quietly, methodically, without drama, without telling anyone, without certainty that it would ever matter. For 2 years, while the world around her acted as though she had nothing left, she kept everything. And when the moment arrived, not because she had manufactured the moment, not because she had rushed it or forced it, but because she had been ready for it when it came, she was prepared. That is the thing about the women who build quietly. The world consistently underestimates how much they have been paying attention, how carefully they have been keeping records, how thoroughly they understand the architecture of what was taken from them and exactly what it would require to take it back. Marcus Hale sent that invitation because he thought he understood Lily Palmer, because he had watched her for 7 years and believed he knew what she was made of. He had been watching the wrong thing the entire time. She kept everything, and when the moment arrived, she was ready. If this story found you when you needed it, if something in it hit different today than it would have yesterday, leave a comment and tell me which part stayed with you. I read every single one, every time. The invitation on a Wednesday morning, the card in the top shelf envelope, the red dress, the walk up the stone steps, the ballroom at 4:47, the man standing alone in the center of his own empty reception. Or maybe it was none of those. Maybe it was the bathroom floor and 11 minutes and then back to work. Maybe it was the bedside drawer and the drive and the quiet, patient keeping of everything that was hers. Tell me. Because those are the moments I write for. The ones that land somewhere specific, somewhere you didn't expect to find them, somewhere that tells you the story already knew something about your life before you did. And if you know someone who has been building quietly, who has been patient longer than anyone should have to be, who is doing the work in a room that hasn't given them the credit yet, who keeps the copies and the records and the documentation of everything they have made, not because they are certain the moment will come, but because they cannot bring themselves to leave behind what is theirs. Share this with them, not to stir anything up, just so they know the work was real. It always was. It still is. And the moment comes for people who are ready for it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on notifications. New story every week, right here. I'll see you in the next one.